Good morning and welcome back to the VIP seat. Preston Holland is at CGI London. We have news on M&A deals. Sit back, buckle up, and let's take off. All right, Preston. So you are our man on the ground in London this week. I would say I don't miss the weather over there, but it's also freaking cold in Florida too. So everywhere is chilly.
Yeah, I feel like a BBC reporter live from London. This is Preston Holland because we are in London. It is the middle of the afternoon, which is odd, being on the time slip, but it is cold, rainy, and a couple of keywords is Trump tariffs and AI. Those are the two big topics that we have heard a lot about so far at CGI in the first full day of sessions, and then yesterday during kind of the State of the Union emergency town hall meeting.
Yeah, I feel like tariffs have been the topic du jour now for, the last year and a half. So is that kind of what everybody is worried about? Again, I think Bombardier tariffs, but also Europe and other places as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think the generic undertone is that Trump is incredibly unpredictable, and that is making doing business as usual harder for operators and for aircraft sellers and financiers that are all here gathered together. It's kind of been the number one thing anybody wants to talk to the Americans about. So me and my fellow Americans that are here at CJI London, everybody wants to know, what is Trump doing? And we just say, I have no idea. Your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, we're going to get into, we had the emergency show last week on that Truth Social post. We're also going to get into some follow-up at the end of the show here, so definitely stay tuned for that. But what's the general feeling? We know the European market isn't as, let's say, robust as the American, but are people positive? What are they thinking about coming out this year?
Yeah, I think the general sentiment in Europe is less optimistic. I feel like there's a lot of optimism in the US market right now. There's a lot of deal activity, there's a lot of growth, there's a lot of companies buying companies and things like that. There's kind of this general undertone of, positive and things are good for the industry, flight hours are up and all of that. I would say that the mood here is less optimistic and more, how do we return back to normal? I have not talked about the pandemic more than I have in the last 2 days. Frankly, I think that the United States has kind of moved on from what happened during the pandemic. And I think that really what we have is a bifurcation of market post-pandemic, whereas in America, the pandemic was actually really good for private aviation. If you look at it on the macro, now pilot salaries are up and costs are up and supply chain, those are not necessarily, net good. But I think the generic attitude is that the pandemic was positive for private aviation in the United States. I think over here, it's the flip side. I think that the pandemic really put a lot of strain on the ecosystem because not only did you have, the same supply chain stuff that we dealt with in the United States, but you also had this general sentiment shift against private aircraft in Europe that we didn't necessarily get in the United States. So I think that general tone is apparent here in the conversations that you have. But I think generally speaking, there's a lot of optimism about the European market. And I think too, the thing that's unique about CJI that's different than any other conference is that although we are in London, this is truly a multicultural, multinational. There's a lot of talk of the Middle East. There's a lot of talk about emerging markets in Africa. There's a lot of talk about Asia. Even though we're at the London, you'd think that it would all just be very EU focused. But I think that there's a general sentiment that EU operators and EU kind of private aviation ecosystem really sees there huge opportunities happening in some of these emerging markets, as opposed to maybe the more mature, possibly shrinking market here in Europe.
So the other thing I think that's kind of fallen at least a little bit culturally out of popularity in the US is the environmental sustainability conversation, or at least some people are still having it and some people aren't. So it's always been a bigger deal in London. I know there've been protesters in the past at the show specifically. So what's going on there? Is it still a hot topic, or is it starting to get the brakes a little bit as well?
I think everybody is aware of that general sentiment here. The security at this event, by the way, like Miami it's a great event, but it's pretty relatively open, generally speaking. This event is locked down. You cannot walk past. There's sets of security at the front door. at the registration table, at every exit and entrance, and they make sure that only the people who are supposed to be here are here. So you have to have a badge on, all of that, which I think is an indication of what has happened in the past. For those that don't know, there's a protest last year. They kind of made it into the auditorium apparently and stood up and started shouting. So there is a lot of sensitivity to that potential protesters and things like that. I think talking to European operators, they are still incredibly aware of it. I think the European market is probably a little bit ahead of us, understanding that, while SAF is a great dream, that it's probably not going to be reality for a long time, because there's a lot of geopolitical tensions even between EU countries. And so SAF is a topic that makes sense for some and doesn't make sense for others. I was talking to someone and they were talking about how much oil and gas that England imports from their close neighbors because they can't drill it here, but they still import it and they still burn it. So I think that they have generally accepted that it's going to be an undertone. I think maybe there's a little bit of hope that it might just go away, kind of like it might have a little bit in the United States. But I think that it's a little bit more, I think hostile is a strong word, but I don't have another word that is a little bit lighter than that.
Yeah. Look at the majority of oil was coming from Russia before, and they were trying to get off of Russian oil. So cost is very important right now, and it kind of changes the conversation. We would love to do certain things, but the realities are sometimes different.
Yeah, exactly. But I think generally positive. This is a really, really A+ event. It is different than in the United States. Like the Miami event is great. I would say that the curation that happens around this event, it's a smaller event, but it is really, really high quality, high caliber people.
Very nice. All right. Well, we also have to give Preston a shout out here because he is now a board member at GLADA, and we forgot to give him a kudos for that. So congratulations, Preston. You are a official GLADA board member. How does it feel?
Awesome. Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. Thank you for the congratulations. It is great. I've been a part of the organization and really tried to give back to the community. So it's a good organization, really trying to put in some professionalization on, kind of aircraft sales and marketing and dealers. There's a lot of dealers in our group that inventory aircraft. So I'm really excited. I'm thankful to the board for electing me and seeing that, feeling as though I be able to make a contribution, and just look forward to serving the group. So it's a lot of fun.
The VIP seat is brought to you by RealJet. One thing that sets RealJet apart is their commitment to safety and quality at every level. Every operator they work with meets top tier industry standards. It's private aviation with real oversight, not guesswork. And when it comes to aircraft access, RealJet gives you the full spectrum. More than 1,500 premium options, from light jets to ultra long range cabins, from short regional flights to international missions. Their team curates the ideal aircraft and operator to bring a seamless, best-in-class experience. With RealJet, you feel the difference from the moment you book. Real people, real trust, RealJet. All right. Well, the big topic this week, beyond the Trump thing that we will get to later, is also the FAA shutdown. The government shutdown in general has occurred. So we kind of predicted this last week that, everything was on par. And then what happened in Minneapolis has kind of turned into a political firebomb. We don't think this is going to last too long. That's what a lot of people are saying. If you go in the Kalshi markets and see, what the predictions are, it looks like it's going to be pretty short. Who actually knows where we're headed? But here we go. We got another shutdown again.
Yeah, exactly. It's unfortunate that we weren't able to exempt aviation from kind of the shutdown political football madness. I think one of the problems is that how the DOT FAA reporting structure is that Kristi Noem has some, she has some control and influence, right? You have Sean Duffy, and Kristi Noem is the one who's really getting a lot of political flack right now. And so I think that, when you consider that, ICE and all of that kind of falls, it's not exactly in the FAA, but they are neighbors, if you will, right? They're kind of in a lot of the same ecosystems. Unfortunately, I think that we kind of got caught with a stray punch, unfortunately, that I don't think was intended for us, but I think that, it's going to make things a little bit more challenging. I think it's good, though, that we had the shutdown. So I think that there's a little bit more, the one from the fall. So I think that there's a little bit more preparation. We know a little bit better how to respond. TSA and all of that kind of stuff. But hopefully it doesn't get to the point where people are not getting paid for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I think that's been the common thread is that, we're getting really good at these government shutdowns because they keep happening over and over again, which is really frustrating. Let's get to work, folks. But yeah, over 10,000 FAA employees have been furloughed already. 14,000 air traffic controllers are going to be working without pay as usual. Non-essential, quote unquote, functions of the FAA, like aircraft registration and other important things to our industry, are not happening until this kind of gets figured out. So buckle your seatbelts, and those deals may not close until the end of the month, but at least it's not December of 2025 right now.
Yeah, exactly. And there's other parts of business and enterprise that are affected by these shutdowns too. The SBA office, you can't close on SBA loans. And there's actually a weird rule about SBA and foreign ownership. So you now cannot get an SBA loan if your company is owned by a foreign or a permanent resident. Is for US citizens only. And that goes into effect, I think March 1st. Don't quote me on that, but I think I was reading that correctly. And this shutdown has made it to where those people who were in approval process can't just jam it through. So there's a lot of things from a business standpoint. I think that this shutdown creates a lot of havoc. Being in the first quarter, I think makes it different than the fourth quarter for our business, for business aviation, but it doesn't make it any easier. And there is a lot of activity going on, I think, in the transaction markets. I mean, everybody that I talk to is saying, I had a busier January than I had bargained for, in a good way. No one's complaining. But there is a lot of activity, holdover activity from last year, 100% bonus depreciation also being into effect this year. So I think that there's, it's something that definitely needs to get solved. This actually perfectly segues into my Mile High Madness segment. So if for those of you who are new to the show, Mile High Madness is where Jessie and I find great things from the internet and we bring them to you that are business aviation or commercial aviation focused things from aviation. So my post is from Jeff Snowden. Jeff Snowden, for those who don't know, he owns, or he's the president of Aerospace Reports. And Jeff has put out 2 incredibly insightful LinkedIn posts over the past couple of weeks, given the FAA with snow. 1 week ago, he posted, "The FAA is closed today." And then the day later, he said, "The FAA is open today." So smashing insight from Jeff on LinkedIn here. I did comment and I said, I would love a new LinkedIn series where it's just Jeff telling us if the FAA is open today. That is it. So Jeff, if you're listening, we want to see more of is the FAA open today or not coming from Jeff Snowden's LinkedIn page.
I mean, that's a solid follow right there. Just like straight to the point, easy to digest.
Yeah, exactly. There's a couple of Twitter accounts that are like that. Like there's this one that only posts on Fridays, and it's the GIF from Saturday Night Live that's like, "Ladies and gentlemen, the weekend," and that's all it posts. It's just on Fridays. So I think if Jeff Snowden was keeping us updated if the FAA was open today or not, Jeff, we want to see more of that.
Very nice. Very nice. All right. Well, mine is probably going to get me in trouble, but that's also why we like the Mile High Madness segment. But I just loved this video. And it says, if you hate capitalism, it's because you're bad at it. And it's the inside of a private jet. I'm sorry. I just couldn't help it because it's kind of amazing.
That's so good. We're so getting canceled after that, but that's really good.
We may be getting canceled for this post, but we are in the private aviation business. And if you don't love capitalism and private jets, like you probably shouldn't even be listening to the show. So I'm sorry if you're offended, but maybe this is not the show for you.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, we are not news reporters. I had to remind somebody that on my LinkedIn. I was like, this is a blog. Like, you do not have to read it if you don't like it. It's okay.
Yeah.
We're going to be okay. I will say people here at CJI, I've met a few people that were like, "Oh, you don't know me, but I listen to your show every week." So to those people who have said something here at CJI London, thank you. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate you giving us feedback on this show. We are really climbing the ranks, so be sure to share it with friends so that we can keep growing.
Yep. And hopefully, again, I don't lose too many listeners from this idea. But let's talk more about capitalism, because it's been a really, really good year for capitalism last year. In 2025, PitchBook, and for those who don't know what PitchBook is, this is one of like the go-to resources for deal makers for, buying and selling businesses and looking at valuations, understanding comps. Like it's basically like the MLS for like selling businesses. So PitchBook's data has come out And we did globally a whopping $5 trillion in M&A activity last year. The US is up, Europe is up. And for business aviation companies, I think this is really good news. This is a lot more kind of global and at high level looking at M&A deals, but all that means there's more money that's going to be flowing into our industry specifically. So the deals were good. The multiples have been pretty consistent, rising a little bit higher than last year. But all in all, fantastic year for M&A. And I think that points to an even better year coming up this year, hopefully.
Yeah, no, it's good when the macro environment is giving us tailwinds. I think that one thing that has been a topic, both here at CJI and also at a couple of other conversations that I've been having is how to scale your business and set it up to be ready for sale. Because you think about the fuel companies and you think about the trip planning that we covered last year, and you think about all these like the Jeppesen, Boeing carve out. These are massive, massive companies that are trading. And I think that you're seeing that activity from an institutional level that's coming in is you have to be a MRO. I think that the general take is that you need to be an MRO, an FBO, some sort of physical services provider to really be able to have a hyper successful exit in this business. I think that, Dustin Cordier does a lot of content around the idea of setting up your business to be able to sell. I think that is a general theme in aviation. So a lot of these companies I was a pilot and I started flying, and now I have a mediumly large company that all of my kids, are in, and we're going to do an ESOP and, an employee stock option program or however you're going to recapitalize the business. But I think that the institutional capital that is what is backing a lot of those transactions is what this is pointing towards, is that there is money ready to be deployed. It is actively moving. It is actively, there's active deal activity, which is net positive for our industry when people are trying to sell their company because they're trying to retire. Maybe they're, ready to do the next thing. And that also helps with smaller fundraising rounds. I mean, I think that in general, that type of headline is good news for business in general. I think it also, on the flip side, is that it also means that our customers are having excellent activity events. So, you talk to the old school jet brokers, and they all would just read the Wall Street Journal and wait and see who sold a company, and that's their new prospect list, right? Yeah. And so as this liquidity is entering the market for our customers, that means that they are ready to go buy business jets or charter more often or get another fractional or fly their airplane more than they were previously. So I think that too, if you look at kind of the second order effects of what this is going to mean for our business, is it's net positive that our customers have.
Yeah. And deal value actually exceeded 2021, which is great. But also I put a caveat in there because there was a lot of like AI and tech stuff that's inflating those numbers. So there's a lot of optimism in certain sectors, not necessarily others. They love infrastructure. There's a lot of conversations in this report about AI and PE looking for companies that can leverage AI to improve margin. So I think if you're out there as an operator or anyone that has complex problems to solve and you can find unique ways to do that using technology, you're going to get better multiples. We're really new kind of in this AI space, and I think aviation is always lagging behind a little bit. So I think there's an opportunity there for certain businesses that can get ahead of that and reduce their costs substantially in terms of software or whatever. But it's a really interesting report. It's free. If you guys go to PitchBook's website, you can just put your email in and get it. But I think it's a really, really good read for anyone trying to sell their business or who's in this space. There was 18,800 deals globally, and B2B was about 40% of all those deals. So that's another piece in our space. If you're building products for aviation or for aviation users, good opportunity. And of course, the more exits that are had and the more people that need bonus depreciation and the more cash that's in the system, they're going to start flying private more and enjoying the fruits of their labor. So that's all good for us.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And all this comes even though we've had all these tariff issues. I have to note that too. I know everyone's like, oh my gosh, the chaos of tariffs. I'm like, yes, it is chaos. But in spite of that, the economy is humming. We're doing well. I see some optimism there. We're still going to have to stay on our toes because every time there's a change, there's, chaos. But it looks like in spite of uncertainty, people are still highly optimistic about the financial future of the United States specifically, as well as Europe.
Yeah, exactly. I think that kind of brings us into a good pivot on the CGI emergency town hall last night. And I think generically talking about the Trump stuff, I think no one has any clue what is going on. So Tobias from TVPX was on the panel. And what I appreciated about Tobias is he's one of the top figures in import export in the United States. Like, he is the import export broker. And he literally said, I have no idea, and it's probably going to change tomorrow. So I'm partially just going to be reactive and responsive as opposed to proactive. And I think that's an honest take. I think we talked about last week what it could mean and what it could happen. But I think the reality is this is a ever-shifting landscape. He was talking about specifically, right, that the United States does not have a trade deal with Israel, which directly affects the G280. That it has nothing to do with Canada, also has something to do with Gulfstream, because the G280 is technically still an Israeli product, so it's subject to tariffs. The Pilatus PC-12 that was and wasn't and was again. And he was explaining to me in another conversation about how there is a long tail for a lot of these things to get updated through the system. So while Trump may say, here's what it is, and you're going to read a truth post, Truth Social post, and you say, okay, that's what it is, it may take 2, 3, 4 weeks to actually populate through all of the systems. And that's just delays on getting these transactions done. He was telling me that early serial number Phenom 300s are subject to tariffs, but not later serial number Phenom 300s if they haven't been imported. So there's a lot of complex nuance to these import-export transactions, and not just new, it's equally, if not more complicated on the secondhand sale. If you're importing something that has been flying in Germany for a little while, what are you going to do then? When was the last time it was imported, and all of that? So I think, kind of the message is everybody, if you're going to import something, anticipate this taking a while to kind of shake its way out so that you can then, successfully import the aircraft.
Yeah. And I think the best way to look at a Trump Truth Social post or a Trump statement is kind of like reading the tea leaves. He doesn't understand, and even most bureaucrats don't understand how all of the complex, that they were talking in the town hall about these bilateral agreements between countries, how that interplay works with current jurisdiction and, cases that have happened in the US. So I think, suffice it to say, whatever Trump posts out there is not going to be what actually happens, but it gives you a directional indicator of where we're going and where his pain points are with specific issues. I think he's frustrated with Canada, rightly so. They've kind of fallen into the arms of China, partially because we kind of pushed them that way. But I think he's going to start cracking down in little areas that he can on Canadian trade to benefit the US, and vice versa. They're probably going to do the same thing to us. So I'd have concerns, but again, I don't see this. He's not going to, tomorrow, all the Bombardier aircraft are not getting decertified. And that's something that David Hernandez from Better said. This is not a crisis today, but it is something you need to start writing to your contracts. But I think we all have, the last year of tariffs have been so crazy anyway that we all have force majeure in there already. We're already aware of the risk. But there's opportunities too for people that want to take that risk. You might be able to get some deals in that other people aren't willing to take. But all in all, let's just stay tuned, see what happens. But I don't think there's any major crisis happening next week. But I will say, the DOT, Sean Duffy, the head of the DOT, he did retweet that post. So he is all on board with whatever Trump is putting out there.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, moving on to our last story. This is a safety story that Jessie made us all aware of about the cockpit voice recorder. And as not our resident safety expert, I am going to say it's about time for this to be passed. I think it's kind of silly that it's taken so long to get longer recording times on these cockpit voice recorders. So Jessie, give us like the high level, like what is this and what's it mean?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things that NTSB has probably been pushing for decades at this point. EASA had already adopted the 25-hour rule, which basically means the cockpit voice recorder needs to be certified and capable of recording the previous 25 hours of information so that investigators have more to work with. Sometimes the current standard is 2 hours. There's a lot of things that can happen in, say, a 14-hour flight, that that you may want to go back and understand what happened on that aircraft. So now that's mandatory for airlines, and it's going to be coming into play for 30 or more passenger seats and any airplane capable of carrying 30 or more. Most of that's going to happen over the next 2 years. But this is also going to start trickling into 135. A lot of the large airplanes like the Falcon, larger Bombardier aircraft, they also have a requirement to have a cockpit voice recorder, which will also extend to 25 hours on top of that. So some of 91, some of 135 will be affected. And then by 2030, there's going to be a retrofit path even for light and mid-sized jets. So don't think that you're out of this just because you're a small aircraft. Could start affecting you soon. This is all subject to change. I mean, it's a rule, but things get pushed farther and farther out. We know how the FAA works. So we'll have to see how this goes, but it's like such an obvious, we should have had this a long time ago. It's not that expensive a technology, especially for airplanes that already have it on board. To change the card from, 2 hours to 25 hours is not the end of the world. So I'm obviously a huge fan, and I think it'll help safety in the long term.
Yeah, I guess what was the argument against this? Was the argument that we don't want to be surveilled like for the last 25 hours? Like we just want the last 2 hours? Like what's the counter argument here? Like how do you take the other side of this argument? Like, no, we need to stay at 2 hours.
I don't know. Other than maybe unions were trying to protect information. The conversations that happen in the cockpit are all subject to the investigation process. So now when you have 25 hours of information, maybe when you get up to the NTSB board and they start talking about everything that's in there, there's more liability for the company, for the pilot. But this is a safety thing. We really, when there is an accident, we're not talking about pulling the CVR for any other reason other than safety. If something occurs, we need to know what happened. So I think it is a no-brainer. It's just another one of those bureaucracy takes forever kind of deals. EASA already had this in place and it just took us a little longer, which is the same argument that Transport Canada is making for not certifying those aircraft. They're just a little more bureaucratic and take a little more time too. But that's the way it works out here.
Is there any protection in the law about not using, how do you stop the FAA or any other organization from abusing the power of pulling the CVR? Because I think that if you put in a guardrail and said, hey, we're not going to come, I could see the argument that says, well, now my last 25 hours at any given time are going to have an audit trail of my performance. So if the FAA came in and said, oh, we're surprised pulling your card and we're going to go see everything that you've done, I think I could see the argument for that side, and that it could lead to witch hunts, if you will. And, hopefully not, but potentially like politicized witch hunts or corporate espionage witch hunts, right? It's like, oh, please go pull the CVR of my competitor and see if they've been doing things illegally, or maybe a pilot makes somebody mad at FAA and, somebody says, oh, well, we're just going to come pull your CVR. I guess if there is a argument, it would be, how do you create enough protection for the pilots to not allow regulators to come witch hunt?
Yeah, and this is always the debate in safety transparency and legal liability. You talk to the safety officer of a company and you talk to the attorney of the company, they're going to have two very, very different opinions on what should be reported, how often, who it goes to, who gets to see that information. But at the end of the day, that is kind of the fundamental of safety culture and progress. If we're not reporting, analyzing, and learning from it, we don't really improve. Vice versa, every time you do that, you do take on some legal liability. So it really comes down to the FAA. I think the aggressiveness of their enforcement. And these days, their posture is not, let's, kind of nickel and dime you for every single thing. It's that safety culture and compliance, the SMS, safety management system approach, instead of, fines for everybody, for these little tiny things that happen, or even the big things that happen. But again, that can change from administration to administration. So I understand the concern. My hat is always going to be the safety hat. We need more information. We need more data. Let's move forward together. But it's got to be tempered with a reasonable approach from a legal perspective. And let me tell you that victims' families don't have the same perspective that, say an FAA attorney does.
Right. Yeah. No, that's very true. Well, I know that I said that this was our last story, but I forgot about one that we needed to talk about. The Aerovanti guy is back somehow. For those that forgot, Airavanti was a Piaggio operator out of Tampa, Florida, and they were a huge sponsor of the Bucks. And there has been a laundry list of court filings against this guy, Patrick Brittenhar. There was a big article in, I don't know if it was Forbes or Bloomberg or somebody did a really big expose article on him. And I actually thought he was in jail. And I think I'm not 100% sure he's not in jail, but he is apparently back with a new venture. So some court filings have come out. And again, Doug Golan reported this story. He must have like the world's best alerts set up for these court filings because he finds these things and it's crazy. So I'm going to read a couple of the headlines. The CEO of Airavanti is facing federal charges related to both Airavanti and a medical testing business. So that was before. And then the government wrote, Brittenhar has been charged with multiple crimes for operating 2 multi-million-dollar fraud schemes, including his last 2 businesses, Provista and Airavanti. But apparently he has some operator that he is now doing a deal with or something where he is selling some of the capacity that he had not funded and all of this. Somehow he has an operator that has signed up for this, which I think is crazy, by the way. Absolutely nuts that anybody would sign up with this guy, I think, based on what we have read about historically.
Yeah, I think unfortunately people just don't do their research. And this is just one of the problems with our industry altogether is that, okay, they've got a FAA certificate or, they've got this private jet that's very expensive. They must be legit, but that's just not the way it works. Doug is amazing at this, though. If you really want to understand what all has happened, he's been following this Airavanti story for like years now. So you can go back to private jet card comparisons and read all of his findings on this. But yeah, it doesn't seem like someone I would want to do business with. He is currently on electronic monitoring, so I think he's not in prison, but he is out and about with a little thing on his ankle.
Yeah, those are tough to hide in a suit. It's like, oh, what's that? But I think he's raised a little bit of money or something, and now is basically doing like a sales operation for this operator. When I looked into it, I believe they're based in Texas, and they're kind of a light jet-ish operator, right? Vision Jet, a PC-12, a CJ-3, or a CJ, maybe an old Citation jet. So there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of questions that have come up around, why is this guy still in the business? And I think for operators who do operate with integrity and who operate legitimate businesses that do not get accused of fraudulent behavior and bouncing checks and things like that, I think that there's a lot of frustration when these guys are able to maybe come out unscathed. I think that there's a lot of bitterness that gets built up in some of these, especially the smaller operators who have been around for 50 years, who fly their airplanes and do kind of the normal small business operation. But the fact that this guy can raise money and kind of get a fresh start when you have a lot of pending litigation in federal, local, state court. A lot of people sued this guy for, promises not delivered. There was a yacht component. There was Piaggio. There was triple liens against airplanes that he didn't actually own. And then they were all actually parted out. There's the saga is crazy on this guy. And the fact that he can possibly come out of this thing unscathed, I think creates a lot of bitterness in our industry.
Yeah. Well, trust but verify, as they say. Everyone, don't assume. Go ahead and check on things, because you never know. There's just so many craziness in this industry. I've seen it for years. I don't know why they're all attracted to us, but they are. They're
all attracted to us, and apparently a couple of them have been attracted to Piaggio. Great aircraft, don't get me wrong, but large fleet operators of Piaggios don't exactly have a track record of a ton of above-board activity. But I think the Piaggio aircraft should be a great fleet operation. I think that there is a couple, but it just happens to be that there was a few Piaggio operators in South Florida that kind of had the similar stories. It's a great airplane. I would love to own one, even though they kind of look like a catfish, but I think that they are very cool. But yeah, well, this has been the VIP seat live from London. I'm Preston, Holland. Thanks for joining us. I'm still working on my British accent. It's not quite there yet, but when I come in and I say y'all and howdy, everybody looks at me, they're like, you're not from here. But if you're still at the show, would love to see you. But for my awesome co-host, Jessie Naor, I am Preston Holland. Thanks again to RealJet for sponsoring this week's episode of the VIP Seat. Share it with a friend. Sign up for the newsletter at thevipseat.com. Be sure to share the link there as well. If you send 2 referrals to the newsletter, there's a little referral link at the bottom. If you send 2 referrals, we will give you a live shout out on the show by name, and we will see you all next week.